My hairdresser asked if I was ready for a big change, and I thought she meant bangs. I walked into this fancy new salon downtown for a simple haircut. I'd been growing my hair for 6 years and it was down to my waist, but I wanted a trim and maybe some bangs. I sat down in the chair and the hairdresser walked over. She looked at my hair with this intense emotional expression and put her hand over her heart. Wow, you are so brave for doing this. I laughed awkwardly because that seemed like a weird thing to say about bangs. She asked if I was ready for a big change and I said yes, assuming we were talking about the same thing. She got tears in her eyes. Actual tears. I just want you to know that you're an inspiration. I had no idea what to say to that, so I just smiled and pulled out my phone to check my messages. She kept talking while she moved around behind me. You're going to feel so free after this. So light. It's really a beautiful thing you're doing. I nodded along while scrolling through Instagram, thinking this woman was really passionate about bangs. My sister had texted me 3 times about her wedding next week, asking if I'd picked up my bridesmaid dress yet. I started typing a response. The hairdresser touched my shoulder gently. I think what you're doing is so powerful. It takes real courage. I looked up and smiled politely, wondering why she was being so dramatic about a haircut. Thanks, I appreciate that. My phone buzzed again. My boss wanted to know if I'd finished the presentation for our meeting on Thursday. I opened my email and started scrolling through the slides I needed to review. The hairdresser kept making small talk while she ran her fingers through my hair. Do you have a good support system? Family and friends who are there for you? I glanced up briefly. Oh yeah, my family's great. She nodded like I'd said something profound. That's so important. You're going to need people around you. I had no idea what she meant by that, but I was distracted by another text from my sister. She'd sent 7 bridesmaid dress options and they were all hideous. I started scrolling through them, trying to figure out how to tell her I hated all of them without starting a fight. The hairdresser squeezed my shoulder. I'm just so moved by your strength. This is such a big step and I'm honored to be part of your journey. I mumbled thanks, while staring at a purple dress covered in ruffles. I heard her moving around behind me, opening drawers and getting things ready. She took a deep breath. Okay, let's get started then. I felt something cold and vibrating press against the top of my head. I looked up from my phone at the mirror and watched a huge stripe of bare scalp appear where my hair used to be. I screamed and dropped my phone. What are you doing? She jumped back with electric clippers buzzing in her hand. I'm shaving your head? Like you asked? I grabbed my head where I could feel cold air on my scalp. I wanted bangs. Just bangs. Her face went completely white. You're not Rebecca? The woman doing the cancer fundraiser? We both started yelling. The receptionist ran over freaking out. Apparently, Rebecca had canceled her appointment last minute to shave her head for charity, and nobody told the hairdresser. We have the same first name. The hairdresser kept saying, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, while I stared at my reflection in horror. There was a massive bald stripe right down the center of my head. The hairdresser started hyperventilating. We can't leave it like this. We have to finish or you'll look insane. I sat there sobbing while she shaved the rest of my head. 6 years of growth gone in 10 minutes. The manager came out offering to comp everything and giving me free products I didn't want. The hairdresser was crying harder than I was. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I thought you knew. All those things I said. I have a huge work presentation in 2 days where I'm trying to get promoted to senior director. My sister's wedding is next weekend and I'm the maid of honor. Every single photo is going to be me with a completely bald head. The manager offered me a free wig from their supply closet, but it looked like something from a dollar store. I drove home crying so hard I had to pull over twice. When I got to my apartment, my boyfriend opened the door and his face went completely white. Oh my god, what happened? Are you sick? I explained the whole nightmare through sobs. He pulled out his phone and looked up the salon, then the hairdresser's name. He found her Instagram and his face changed. He turned the phone toward me and there she was in dozens of photos with my ex-boyfriend. The ex-boyfriend who told me he'd make me regret leaving him. My boyfriend looked at me. Do you think this was actually an accident? I wiped my tears and got back in my car with my boyfriend, ready to drive to that salon. My boyfriend drove fast through downtown while I sat in the passenger seat staring at my reflection in the side mirror. The streetlights kept flashing across my completely bald head, and it looked wrong every single time. I couldn't stop touching the smooth skin where my hair used to be just hours ago. My boyfriend's hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white, but he didn't say anything. I kept running my palm over my scalp, feeling the bumps and curves I'd never noticed before. The silence in the car felt heavy and awful. I wanted to say something, but I didn't know what words would make this less terrible. My phone buzzed with another text from my sister asking about the bridesmaid dress, but I just shoved it back in my purse. We pulled up to the salon 20 minutes later, and most of the lights were already off inside. The closed sign hung in the window, and I could see someone moving around sweeping the floor. My boyfriend parked right in front, and we both got out without talking. I walked up to the glass door and knocked hard. The manager looked up from behind the front desk, and her face went completely white when she saw us. She rushed over and unlocked the door with shaking hands. She didn't even ask why we came back. She just opened the door wide and stepped aside to let us in. Her guilty expression told me she knew exactly why we were there. She locked the door behind us and walked quickly toward her office in the back. We followed her past the empty salon chairs and the smell of hair products. She opened her office door and turned on the light. The small room had a desk covered in papers and a computer and 2 chairs facing it. She sat down behind the desk and gestured for us to sit. My boyfriend stayed standing. He pulled out his phone and started scrolling through something. I sat in one of the chairs and my legs felt weak. The manager kept looking between us with this scared, worried look on her face. My boyfriend turned his phone toward her without saying anything. She leaned forward to look at the screen and I watched her face change. Her mouth opened slightly and her eyes got really wide. My boyfriend started swiping through photos and she kept staring. I could see the images reflected in her glasses. The hairdresser and my ex-boyfriend at a concert, at a restaurant, at someone's birthday party, at a park, dozens and dozens of photos together. The manager scrolled through them herself now and her face kept getting paler. She looked at photos from last month and 3 months ago and 6 months ago. My boyfriend pointed at the dates on some of the posts. The manager put her hand over her mouth. She looked up at me and I saw real horror in her eyes now. I started explaining about my ex-boyfriend and how we broke up 6 months ago. I told her about the things he said when I left. How he told me I'd regret it. How he said he'd make sure I paid for leaving him. My voice shook while I talked, but I kept going. The manager listened and her expression got worse with every sentence. She kept shaking her head like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. When I finished talking, she grabbed her desk phone. She pressed some buttons and held it to her ear. She told someone to come to her office right now. She hung up and we all sat there waiting. Nobody said anything. I could hear my own breathing. 2 minutes later, there was a knock on the office door. The manager called out for the person to come in. The door opened and the hairdresser walked in looking nervous. Her eyes were still red from crying earlier. Then she saw me and my boyfriend sitting there. She saw the phone on the desk showing her Instagram. Her face changed completely. The nervous look turned into pure panic. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at the manager and started crying again. She said it was a mistake over and over. She said she didn't mean to. The manager held up her hand to stop her. My boyfriend leaned against the desk and looked right at the hairdresser. He asked when the Rebecca appointment was booked. The hairdresser stammered and said she didn't remember exactly. My boyfriend asked when Rebecca called to cancel. The hairdresser said she never got that message. She said nobody told her. Her voice got higher and more panicked with each answer. My boyfriend asked who took the cancellation call. The hairdresser said she didn't know. She kept looking at the door like she wanted to run. The manager turned to her computer and started typing. She pulled up the salon's appointment system and turned the monitor so we could all see it. She clicked through some screens and pointed at an entry. Rebecca's appointment was right there. Booked 3 weeks ago for a charity head shaving. The note said cancer fundraiser and everything. The manager scrolled down and showed us the cancellation. Yesterday morning at 10:15. The hairdresser stared at the screen and her crying got worse. The manager picked up her phone again and called someone else. She asked them to come to the office immediately. We waited again in awful silence. The hairdresser stood by the door wiping her eyes and shaking. A few minutes later, the receptionist walked in looking confused. The manager asked her about Rebecca's appointment. The receptionist nodded and said Rebecca called yesterday morning around 10 to cancel. The manager asked if she told anyone. The receptionist said yes, of course she told the hairdresser right away. She said she walked back to the hairdresser's station and gave her the message in person. The hairdresser shook her head hard and said no, that never happened. The receptionist looked shocked and said yes, it definitely did happen. She said she remembered clearly because the hairdresser was with another client, and she waited until the client left to tell her. The hairdresser kept denying it, but her voice sounded weak now. I noticed she kept glancing at her phone sitting on the manager's desk next to the computer. She looked at it every few seconds like she was worried about something. My boyfriend noticed too. He pointed at the phone and asked to see it. The hairdresser's face went bright red and she said no. She said that was private. My boyfriend looked at the manager and asked if she could require it. The manager stared at the hairdresser for a long moment. Then she said if the hairdresser wanted to keep her job, she needed to hand over the phone right now. The hairdresser started crying even harder. She picked up the phone with shaking hands and unlocked it. She gave it to my boyfriend like she was handing over something that would destroy her. My boyfriend took it and started scrolling. His face got darker as he read. He turned the phone toward me and the manager. Text messages between the hairdresser and my ex-boyfriend from this morning. My ex had texted asking if she was ready for today. The hairdresser responded that she was nervous but committed. My ex sent back a thumbs up and said she was doing the right thing. The hairdresser replied asking if he was sure about this. My ex said I deserved what was coming and she was helping him teach me a lesson. The manager read the messages and stood up from her desk so fast her chair rolled backward. She told the hairdresser to sit down right now. The hairdresser collapsed into a chair and put her face in her hands. She was shaking so hard the chair moved. The manager stood over her and asked if those text messages were real. The hairdresser nodded without looking up. My boyfriend leaned against the desk with his arms crossed and asked how she knew my ex. The hairdresser took a long, shaky breath and said he was her cousin. She said they grew up together and were really close. I felt like someone punched me in the stomach. My boyfriend asked when she found out about me and my ex dating. The hairdresser wiped her eyes and said about 2 weeks ago. She said my ex called her and told her his crazy ex-girlfriend would be coming to the salon soon. She swore she had no idea we dated until that phone call. The manager asked what else he told her. The hairdresser started crying harder and said my ex told her I was stalking him. She said he claimed I was making his life awful and wouldn't leave him alone. She said he told her I was spreading lies about him to all his friends and family. My hands were shaking. So bad I had to sit down. My boyfriend moved closer to me and put his hand on my shoulder. The hairdresser kept talking through her tears. She said my ex told her I needed to be taught a lesson. She said he convinced her that embarrassing me would make me stop bothering him. She looked at me for the first time and said she thought shaving my head would just be a bad haircut that would embarrass me for a few weeks. She said she had no idea about my work presentation or my sister's wedding. She said she didn't know it would ruin important events in my life. I stared at her and couldn't believe what I was hearing. My boyfriend asked about Rebecca's cancellation. The hairdresser looked down at her hands. The manager repeated the question louder. The hairdresser said the receptionist did tell her about the cancellation yesterday morning. She said she knew Rebecca wasn't coming. My boyfriend asked why she went through with it anyway. The silence in that office was terrible. The hairdresser finally whispered that my ex had convinced her I deserved it. She said he made her believe I was a terrible person who was ruining his life. The manager grabbed her desk phone and told the hairdresser to get out. The hairdresser looked up with panic on her face and asked what she meant. The manager said she was fired effective immediately. The hairdresser stood up fast and started begging. She said she made a mistake and she was so sorry. She said she needed this job and couldn't afford to lose it. The manager told her this wasn't a mistake. It was assault. She said she was calling the police and the hairdresser needed to leave the building right now. The hairdresser turned to me and started apologizing over and over. My boyfriend stepped between us and told her not to come any closer. The manager walked to the door and opened it. She told the hairdresser to go or she would have security remove her. The hairdresser grabbed her purse and ran out crying. The manager closed the door and locked it. She sat back down at her desk and looked at me. She asked if I was okay and I shook my head because I wasn't okay at all. My boyfriend pulled a chair next to mine and sat down. The manager picked up her phone and dialed. She asked for the police department and waited. She told them she needed to report an assault at her salon. She gave them the address and explained briefly what happened. She said yes, she would wait for officers to arrive. She hung up and told us the police were on their way. I sat there trying to process everything. My ex-boyfriend planned this. He found out where I was getting my hair cut and convinced his cousin to ruin my life. The manager opened her desk drawer and pulled out a bottle of water. She handed it to me and I took it with shaking hands. My boyfriend asked how long the police would take. The manager said they told her about 20 minutes. She pulled up the text messages on the hairdresser's phone again and took screenshots with her own phone. She said she wanted copies of everything before the police took the phone as evidence. My boyfriend asked if he could take photos too. The manager nodded and handed him the phone. He took pictures of all the messages between the hairdresser and my ex. He also took photos of the appointment system showing Rebecca's cancellation. The manager printed out the appointment records and the cancellation notice. She put everything in a folder and labeled it with my name and today's date. We sat in that office waiting and nobody knew what to say. I kept touching my bald head and feeling sick. The manager apologized again and said she never imagined something like this could happen at her salon. She said in 20 years of business she'd never seen anything this awful. My boyfriend held my hand and I could feel how angry he was. His jaw was tight and he kept clenching and unclenching his free hand. A knock came at the door and the manager got up to answer it. 2 police officers stood outside and she let them in. They introduced themselves and asked what happened. The manager explained the whole situation from the beginning. She showed them the text messages and the appointment records. One officer took notes while the other one looked at the evidence. They asked to see my head and I felt humiliated, but I let them look. One officer took photos with a camera from different angles. The other officer asked me questions about my relationship with my ex. I told them we broke up 6 months ago and he threatened to make me regret it. I showed them old text messages on my phone where he said he would make sure I paid for leaving him. The officer taking notes asked if I had any other evidence of threats. I scrolled through my phone and found more messages. My ex had sent dozens of angry texts after the breakup. The officer photographed those messages too. They asked about the hairdresser and the manager gave them her full name and employee file. The manager explained she fired her immediately after discovering what happened. The officers asked where the hairdresser was now and the manager said she made her leave the building. One officer went outside to see if the hairdresser was still in the parking lot. The other officer explained what charges could be filed. He said this could be assault, conspiracy, or harassment depending on what the prosecutor decided. He said the text messages between my ex and the hairdresser showed planning and intent. He asked if I wanted to press charges. I said yes without even thinking about it. My boyfriend squeezed my hand and nodded. The officer wrote everything down and said he would file a report tonight. He said a detective would contact me in the next few days to follow up. The other officer came back and said the hairdresser's car was gone from the parking lot. He said they would go to her address after finishing here. They asked a few more questions and took statements from me, my boyfriend, and the manager. The whole process took over an hour. When they finally finished, it was almost midnight. The officers gave me a card with the case number and told me to call if I remembered anything else. They thanked the manager for cooperating and said someone would be in touch. They left and the office felt too quiet. The manager pulled out a business card and wrote something on the back. She handed it to me and said it was her personal cell number. She said to call her anytime if I needed anything. She said the salon would cover any costs related to this situation. She offered free services for life, but I told her I was never coming back to this place. She nodded like she understood. My boyfriend and I walked out to the parking lot and got in the car. I was exhausted and my head hurt from crying. We drove home in silence and I stared out the window at the empty streets. When we got to my apartment, I went straight to the bathroom. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized my reflection. The cheap wig from the salon was sitting on the counter. I picked it up and put it on. It looked ridiculous. The color was wrong and it sat too high on my head. The hair was synthetic and shiny in a fake way. I took it off and threw it in the trash. My boyfriend came in and stood behind me. He said we would go to a real wig store tomorrow. He said they had places that specialized in medical hair loss and made custom wigs that looked natural. I nodded, but I felt hopeless. I went to bed but couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the hairdresser's face or my ex's smug smile. I picked up my phone and opened Instagram. I searched for my ex's profile and started scrolling. There were photos of him at family events with the hairdresser. Birthday parties, holidays, graduations. They were in dozens of pictures together over the years. I found one from last Christmas where they were wearing matching ugly sweaters. The caption said something about favorite cousin. I felt sick looking at it. He had spent months planning this. He found out where I was going and manipulated his cousin into attacking me. I put my phone down and stared at the ceiling. My presentation was in 2 days. My sister's wedding was next weekend. Everything felt ruined and I didn't know how to fix any of it. The next morning, my boyfriend texted his boss that he was sick and couldn't come in. He drove me to a medical wig store across town that specialized in hair loss from cancer and other conditions. The place opened at 9 and we were waiting in the parking lot when the consultant unlocked the doors. She was middle-aged with kind eyes and didn't ask any questions about why I needed a wig. She just led me to a private room with mirrors and pulled out catalogs showing different styles and colors. I started crying again looking at all the options because none of them were my actual hair. My boyfriend squeezed my hand and told the consultant we needed something that looked natural for work and a wedding. She nodded and disappeared into the back room. She came back with an armful of wigs in different shades of brown. I tried on the first one and it looked like a costume wig from a Halloween store. The second one was too dark and made me look like someone else entirely. The third one had the wrong texture. I kept trying them on while my boyfriend sat in the corner giving feedback. The consultant was patient and kept bringing out more options. After about an hour, I found one that looked somewhat close to my real hair color and length. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best option we'd seen. The consultant checked the price tag and said it was $800. I felt sick because I didn't have that much money in my checking account after paying rent. My boyfriend pulled out his credit card before I could say anything. He told the consultant to ring it up and I started to argue, but he cut me off. He said my ex caused this whole situation, so he was paying for the solution. The consultant took his card and processed the payment while I stared at myself in the mirror wearing fake hair. She came back and showed me how to put the wig on properly. She demonstrated how to position it on my head and adjust the straps inside to make it fit snugly. I put it on myself and looked almost normal, except I could feel it sitting on top of my scalp like a hat. The consultant said that was normal and I'd get used to the sensation. She pulled out a small bottle of adhesive and a package of clips. She explained that the adhesive went along my hairline to keep the wig from shifting, and the clips attached to any remaining hair I had. I didn't have any hair left, so she said the adhesive would be enough. She showed me how to apply it in a thin line and let it get tacky before pressing the wig down. She made me practice taking the wig off and putting it back on 3 times until I could do it smoothly. My boyfriend watched the whole process and asked questions about what to do if the wig shifted in public. The consultant said the adhesive should hold for a full day, but I could carry the bottle with me just in case. We left the store with the wig in a special box and a bag full of adhesive, wig shampoo, and a stand to store it on. Back at my apartment, I practiced my work presentation wearing the wig. My boyfriend sat on the couch with his phone timer ready. I stood in front of our TV and went through my slides from memory. I kept losing my train of thought because I was so aware of the fake hair on my head. Every time I moved, I felt the wig shift slightly, and I had to fight the urge to reach up and adjust it. My boyfriend told me to start over, and I did. I made it through about 10 minutes before I completely blanked on what came next. He said I was doing fine, but I needed to relax. I tried again and got through 15 minutes before forgetting my closing statement. We practiced for 2 hours until I could get through the whole presentation without major mistakes. My boyfriend said the wig looked natural and nobody would know it was fake. I didn't believe him, but I appreciated him trying. That evening, my phone rang with an unknown number. I answered, and it was a detective from the police department. He said they'd contacted my ex for questioning about the salon incident. My ex denied everything at first, but when they showed him the text messages with his cousin, he changed his story. He admitted he'd asked her to mess with me, but claimed he didn't know she would shave my head. The detective said my ex was trying to make it sound like he just wanted his cousin to give me a bad haircut. He said the text messages were vague enough that proving conspiracy would be difficult in court. I asked what that meant for my case, and he said they were still investigating, but I shouldn't expect criminal charges against my ex. The hairdresser would definitely face charges for assault, but my ex might get away with it. I hung up feeling angry and helpless. My phone rang again 20 minutes later, and it was my sister. She was crying before I even said hello. She said she saw my Instagram story about what happened. I'd posted a photo of my bald head last night with a long explanation about the salon mistake and potential sabotage. The post had gotten hundreds of comments from people expressing sympathy and outrage. My sister said she couldn't believe my ex would do something so cruel. She kept apologizing like it was somehow her fault. I told her it wasn't and tried to calm her down. She said she wanted to postpone the wedding so I wouldn't have to deal with being in photos while going through this trauma. I immediately told her no. She'd been planning this wedding for 18 months, and I wasn't going to let my ex ruin her big day too. I promised her the wig looked good, and I'd still be a beautiful maid of honor. She made me send her a photo of me wearing the wig, and when I did, she said I looked amazing. I knew she was lying to make me feel better, but I loved her for it anyway. The morning of my work presentation, I woke up at 5. I went straight to the bathroom with the wig and all the supplies. I read the instructions the consultant had written down and started applying the adhesive along my hairline. My hands were shaking so badly I had to stop and take deep breaths. The adhesive had to dry until it felt tacky, which took about 5 minutes. Then I positioned the wig on my head and pressed down firmly along the edges. I checked it in the mirror from every angle to make sure it looked natural. It took me 40 minutes to get everything positioned correctly, and by the end I was sweating with anxiety. I got dressed in my best suit and drove to the office. I arrived an hour early and went straight to the bathroom. I locked myself in a stall and checked the wig in my compact mirror. It looked fine, but I was convinced it would fall off during my presentation. I came out and washed my hands, and a coworker walked in. She looked at me and smiled and said she loved my new hairstyle. I thanked her and said I'd been wanting a change. Another coworker came in a few minutes later and complimented my hair too. Neither of them realized it was fake, which gave me a tiny bit of confidence that maybe I could pull this off. The presentation started at 9, and I walked into the conference room where 5 executives sat around a long table with their laptops open. I set up my slides and felt the wig shift slightly when I bent over to plug in my laptop. My hand moved toward my head, but I caught myself and grabbed my water bottle instead. I started talking through the first slide about market trends and customer data. Every few seconds, I became aware of the wig sitting on my head and had to force myself not to touch it. One of the executives asked a question about our competitor analysis, and I stumbled over my answer because I was thinking about whether the wig looked crooked. I clicked to the next slide and kept talking. My scalp itched under the adhesive, but I couldn't scratch it. I made it through slide 7 without breaking down, even though I felt like crying the entire time. The executives asked more questions, and I answered them while fighting the constant urge to check if the wig was still in place. I finished my last slide after 23 minutes, and the executives thanked me. I packed up my laptop with shaking hands and walked out of the conference room. My boss caught up with me in the hallway outside his office. He said the presentation was strong and the data was solid, but I seemed distracted during the Q&A section. I tried to hold it together, but tears started running down my face before I could stop them. I pulled out my phone and showed him the police report from 2 nights ago. He read through it with his mouth hanging open. He looked up at me and then back at the report. He asked if the wig I was wearing was because of what happened at the salon. I nodded and wiped my eyes. He said the promotion decision would be delayed 2 weeks, so I could recover from this trauma. I told him I didn't need time to recover. He insisted I should take some days off to deal with everything. I said staying busy was the only thing keeping me from falling apart completely, and if he sent me home, I would just sit there thinking about my ruined hair and my ex-boyfriend's revenge plot. He looked uncomfortable, but agreed to let me keep working. I went back to my desk and tried to focus on emails, but couldn't stop touching my head to make sure the wig hadn't moved. That afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. A man introduced himself as the hairdresser's lawyer. He said his client was devastated by what happened and wanted to make things right. He offered me $15,000 plus coverage of all my wig costs if I agreed to drop the criminal charges and sign a non-disclosure agreement. I told him I needed time to think about it and hung up. I left work early and drove home to talk to my boyfriend. He was making dinner when I walked in, and I told him about the settlement offer. He stopped chopping vegetables and turned around. He said I shouldn't accept it because accepting felt like letting them win. I sat down at the kitchen table and put my head in my hands. I said I was tired of dealing with this nightmare, and $15,000 would cover the wig and therapy and all the other costs. He said money wouldn't fix what they did to me, and my ex-boyfriend needed to face real consequences for conspiring to humiliate me. I felt torn between wanting justice and wanting this whole thing to be over. I called my sister and explained the settlement offer while my boyfriend finished making dinner. My sister said I should reject it because my ex-boyfriend threatened to make me regret leaving him, and he actually followed through on that threat. She said if I let him get away with it by accepting money, then he would think he could keep doing things like this. I knew she was right, but part of me just wanted to take the money and move on. I called the lawyer back and told him I was rejecting the settlement and proceeding with criminal charges. He said trials were stressful and public and asked if I was sure I wanted to put myself through that. I said I was tired of being the victim and hung up on him. 2 days later, I met my sister at the bridal shop for my final dress fitting. The seamstress brought out my bridesmaid dress and I changed in the dressing room. The dress fit perfectly, but when I looked in the mirror, I started crying because I looked so different from the photos we took 6 months ago when we first picked out dresses. My sister came into the dressing room and found me sobbing in front of the mirror. She hugged me and said I was still beautiful, and my bald head under the wig didn't change who I was as a person. She suggested I take the wig off during the reception so I could be comfortable and not worry about it falling off while dancing. I said absolutely not because I didn't want to ruin her wedding photos with my bald head. She said it wouldn't ruin anything, but I refused to even consider it. The seamstress made a few small adjustments to the dress hem and said everything was ready for the wedding. We left the bridal shop and my sister drove me home. My phone rang as I was walking up to my apartment. The prosecutor's office was calling to give me an update on the case. The woman on the phone said they were charging my ex-boyfriend with conspiracy to commit assault and criminal harassment. The hairdresser was charged with assault and battery for the actual head shaving. I asked when the court date would be, and she said probably 3 to 4 months depending on their court schedule. She said both of them would likely try to negotiate plea deals to avoid going to trial. I thanked her and hung up feeling relieved that they were facing real charges. The next evening, my phone rang with an unknown number, and I let it go to voicemail while cooking dinner with my boyfriend. I listened to the message an hour later and froze when I heard a man introducing himself as my ex-boyfriend's lawyer. He said his client was deeply sorry for what happened and wanted to make things right without going through a long court process. He left his direct number and asked me to call him back to discuss a resolution. I played the voicemail for my boyfriend, and he immediately pulled up his laptop to research whether lawyers were allowed to contact victims directly in criminal cases. He found several articles saying it violated proper legal protocol and could be considered witness intimidation. I forwarded the voicemail to the prosecutor's office with a message explaining what happened. She called me back within 30 minutes and said she would be filing a motion about the improper contact, and it would actually strengthen our case. The night before my sister's wedding, I stood in our living room wearing the wig, and my boyfriend put on music from the reception playlist. He took my hands and spun me around slowly while I focused on whether the wig stayed in place. We moved faster, and he twirled me under his arm, and the wig shifted slightly, but the clips held it secure. I adjusted it back into position, and we tried again with more aggressive movements. He dipped me backward, and I laughed for the first time in days, because the wig stayed on, and I felt almost like a normal person getting ready for a wedding. We practiced for an hour until I felt confident the adhesive and clips would hold through dancing. The wedding day arrived, and I woke up at 5 in the morning to start getting ready. I spent 90 minutes applying the wig with extra adhesive and triple-checking every clip was secure. I drove to the venue 2 hours early to help my sister get ready in the bridal suite. She was sitting in her robe getting her makeup done when I walked in wearing my bridesmaid dress and wig. She looked up and started crying immediately, which made her makeup artist annoyed. She hugged me and kept saying I looked perfect, even though I could see in her eyes that she was sad about what happened to me. I helped her into her wedding dress and bustled the train while trying not to think about how different I looked in all the photos compared to when we picked out dresses 6 months ago. The ceremony started at 2 in the afternoon, and I stood at the altar as maid of honor next to my sister. A breeze came through the open windows of the venue, and I felt the wig shift slightly on my head. My heart started racing, and I reached up casually to scratch my head while actually checking if the wig was secure. The adhesive held, but I spent the rest of the ceremony terrified it would fly off in front of 200 guests. I focused on standing perfectly still and avoiding any sudden movements that might dislodge it. The reception started at 5, and my sister's new husband made a toast thanking everyone for coming. He mentioned me specifically, and said he was grateful I was there despite everything I had been through recently. Several guests came up to me during dinner asking what happened and why his toast mentioned me going through something difficult. I gave them the short version about a salon accident that went wrong and left out all the details about my ex-boyfriend and the conspiracy. An older woman approached me at my table while I was eating, and I recognized her immediately as my ex-boyfriend's mother. She sat down in the empty chair next to me and apologized for her son's behavior. She said she was ashamed of what he did and couldn't believe he would conspire to hurt someone like this. She told me she would testify against him in court if it would help my case, and she wanted me to know not everyone in their family supported what he did. I was completely shocked because I never expected his own mother to reach out to me. I told her I would pass her information to the prosecutor and thanked her for being willing to help. She started crying and said she raised him better than this and didn't recognize the person he had become. She squeezed my hand and walked away before I could say anything else. During the dancing portion of the reception, I was spinning with my boyfriend when I felt the wig shift noticeably to the left. I stopped dancing immediately and ran to the bathroom holding the side of my head. My sister saw me leave and followed me into the bathroom where I was standing in front of the mirror trying to fix the wig. She helped me peel back the adhesive and reapply it while we both started laughing at how ridiculous the situation was. We were laughing and crying at the same time because her wedding day had turned into a wig emergency. My boyfriend found us in the bathroom a few minutes later and suggested I just take the wig off for the rest of the night. I looked at him like he was crazy because I wasn't ready to show everyone my bald head. My sister agreed with him and said everyone at the reception loved me regardless of my hair. I stood there looking at both of them and realized I was tired of being scared and hiding. I pulled off the wig and held it in my hands while staring at my reflection. My sister hugged me and said I looked beautiful, and my boyfriend kissed my bald head. We walked back into the reception together, and I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. There was a moment of complete silence where nobody moved or spoke. Then my sister's husband started clapping, and soon everyone in the room was applauding. People came up to me for the rest of the night telling me I was brave and strong and beautiful. I spent the rest of the reception dancing with my boyfriend and talking to guests without constantly checking if the wig was slipping. My sister's friends came up to me throughout the night saying they admired my confidence and asking what happened. I gave them the short version about a salon mistake without mentioning the conspiracy part. An older couple at our table told me I looked beautiful and that my bald head showed real strength. I actually started believing them after the 5th or 6th person said something similar. The wedding photographer took dozens of photos of me dancing and laughing with my sister, and for the first time since the salon incident, I wasn't worried about how I looked in pictures. My boyfriend and I left the reception around midnight and drove home talking about how good it felt to stop hiding. 2 weeks after the wedding, my boss called me into his office on a Tuesday morning. He closed the door and told me the executive team wanted me to come back for a second interview about the senior director position. They were impressed with my presentation despite everything I had been going through. The interview was scheduled for Thursday afternoon with 3 executives I had never met before. I spent Tuesday and Wednesday preparing my answers to common interview questions and reviewing the company's recent projects. Thursday morning, I stood in my bathroom staring at the wig on its stand. My hair had grown back to about half an inch of stubble that felt soft when I touched it. I decided to go to the interview without the wig because I was tired of hiding what happened. I put on my best suit and drove to the office building downtown where the executive offices were located. The 3 executives sat across from me in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows. One of them asked about my appearance right away, and I explained briefly that I was the victim of an assault that resulted in my head being shaved. I didn't go into details about my ex-boyfriend or the conspiracy because I wanted to keep it professional. The executives asked me standard questions about leadership and project management for about 30 minutes. Then the oldest executive leaned forward and said, "My handling of the situation showed resilience and grace under pressure." She told me those were exactly the qualities they wanted in senior leadership. The other two executives nodded in agreement. I accepted immediately and shook hands with all three of them. Walking out of that building, I felt like I had finally won something after weeks of losing. The next day, the prosecutor called to tell me the criminal trial was scheduled for 3 months away. She explained that both my ex-boyfriend and the hairdresser would likely accept plea deals instead of going to trial. I would need to prepare a victim impact statement describing how their actions affected my life. The prosecutor sent me examples of victim statements from other cases so I could see what to include. Over the next few weeks, my hair continued growing slowly, and I was surprised by how much I liked having short hair. I bought cute scarves in different colors and several hats that actually looked good on me. I wore the expensive wig less and less until it just sat on my dresser collecting dust. My new coworkers at the senior director level complimented my scarves and said they liked my style. 1 month after the interview, my ex-boyfriend's lawyer contacted the prosecutor with a plea offer. He would plead guilty to conspiracy and accept 2 years probation plus a 5-year restraining order. The hairdresser was offering a similar deal with community service instead of jail time. The prosecutor called me to discuss whether I wanted to accept the plea deals or push for a trial. She explained that trials were risky because juries were hard to predict. The plea deals guaranteed convictions on their records and restraining orders that would protect me going forward. I told her I would accept the deals only if both of them had to pay me back for everything. The prosecutor calculated my wig costs, therapy bills, and the work I missed during the worst days. The total came to $12,000 split between my ex-boyfriend and the hairdresser. They both agreed to the restitution as part of their plea deals. The plea hearing was scheduled for a Friday morning 6 weeks after the promotion interview. I spent days writing and rewriting my victim impact statement, trying to explain how their conspiracy affected every part of my life. My boyfriend helped me practice reading it out loud so I wouldn't cry during the actual hearing. We arrived at the courthouse early and met the prosecutor in the hallway outside the courtroom. She walked me through what would happen during the hearing, and where I would stand to read my statement. The courtroom was small with wooden benches and fluorescent lights that made everything look yellow. My ex-boyfriend sat at a table with his lawyer on one side of the room. The hairdresser sat at another table with her lawyer on the other side. Neither of them looked at me when I walked in with my boyfriend and the prosecutor. The judge called the case and both defendants stood up to enter their guilty pleas. Then the judge asked if I wanted to read my victim impact statement. I walked to the front of the courtroom holding the papers I had written and rewritten so many times. I started reading about how their conspiracy affected my career and almost cost me the promotion I had worked toward for 2 years. I described standing at my sister's wedding as maid of honor wearing a wig that kept slipping while I worried about ruining her photos. I explained the therapy sessions I needed to deal with the violation of having someone deliberately hurt me for revenge. My ex-boyfriend stared at the floor the entire time, refusing to make eye contact with me. The hairdresser was crying, but I kept reading because I wanted them both to hear exactly what they did. When I finished, the judge thanked me and said my statement was powerful and clear. The judge looked at both defendants and told them to stand up for sentencing. My ex-boyfriend and the hairdresser stood at their separate tables with their lawyers next to them. The judge said she was accepting both plea agreements and entering guilty verdicts for conspiracy and assault charges. She ordered 5-year restraining orders against both of them, meaning they couldn't come within 500 feet of me or contact me in any way. Then she looked directly at my ex-boyfriend and said he needed to complete anger management counseling as part of his probation. She told him his behavior showed a pattern of trying to control and punish his former partner, and that pattern needed to stop immediately. The hairdresser got 2 years probation and 200 hours of community service. The judge ordered both of them to pay me $6,000 each in restitution for the wigs, therapy, and missed work. My ex-boyfriend's face turned red, but he didn't say anything. The hairdresser was crying again, staring at the floor. The judge banged her gavel and said court was dismissed. I walked out of the courtroom with my boyfriend and the prosecutor following behind me. The hallway outside felt cold and bright after sitting in that yellow courtroom for an hour. My boyfriend put his arm around my shoulders and I realized I felt lighter than I had in months. All the anger and fear I'd been carrying around since the salon incident felt smaller somehow. We thanked the prosecutor and she shook my hand, telling me I was brave for following through with the case. Outside the courthouse, my boyfriend suggested we go celebrate with dinner somewhere nice. We drove to this Italian restaurant downtown that we'd been wanting to try for ages. Over pasta and wine, we talked about everything except the court case at first. Then my boyfriend brought up the idea of moving in together now that the legal stuff was finally resolved. He said he hated going back to his apartment at night when I wasn't there. I told him I'd been thinking the same thing, that having him around during all this made me realize how much better life was when we were together. We decided he would move into my apartment since it was bigger and closer to both our jobs. The next few weeks passed in a blur of packing boxes and rearranging furniture. 3 months after the plea hearing, I looked in the mirror one morning and noticed my hair had grown to about 2 inches long. It stuck up in every direction like a pixie cut, and I actually loved how it looked. I'd stopped wearing the wig to work weeks ago because it was hot and uncomfortable. At the office, several coworkers told me they liked my short hair better than the long hair I used to have. One woman said it made me look more professional and confident. I started my new senior director role that same month and discovered something unexpected. I felt more confident in meetings without constantly worrying about how my hair looked. Before the salon incident, I used to check my reflection in my phone screen during presentations, making sure every strand was perfect. Now I just focused on what I was saying instead of how I looked saying it. The traumatic hair loss had forced me to stop tying my self-worth to my appearance. My team responded better to my leadership because I was more present and focused during our discussions. I stopped second-guessing myself in front of the executives. My boss pulled me aside after a big client presentation and said I seemed like a completely different person, more authoritative and sure of myself. 2 months into my new role, my sister called me on a Tuesday afternoon. She was crying, but in a happy way, and I immediately knew what she was going to say. She told me she was pregnant, about 8 weeks along. Then she asked if I would be the godmother. I started crying too, sitting at my desk trying not to let my team hear me through the glass walls of my office. That weekend, my sister and I met for coffee and looked through her wedding photos together. We laughed about how every single picture showed me wearing that obvious wig. My sister said those photos would always remind her of one of the hardest times in my life, but they also showed that I survived it. She pointed to a photo of us dancing at the reception after I'd taken the wig off. My bald head was shining under the disco lights and we were both laughing. So hard we looked insane. She said that was her favorite photo from the whole wedding because it captured real joy instead of posed perfection. A year after the salon incident, I stopped at a coffee shop near my office to grab an afternoon latte. The place was crowded and I was waiting for my order when someone tapped my shoulder. I turned around and saw the hairdresser's cousin, the receptionist from the salon. My stomach dropped and I thought about the restraining order, but she held up her hands immediately. She said she only wanted to apologize for her part in what happened. She told me she quit the salon 2 days after the incident because she felt so guilty about not making sure the hairdresser got the cancellation message. She said she should have double-checked, should have written it down instead of just mentioning it in passing. Her eyes filled with tears, and she said she was genuinely sorry for the role she played in that nightmare. I looked at her standing there in the crowded coffee shop, clearly scared I would yell at her or make a scene. I realized I didn't feel angry anymore. The rage that had burned in my chest for months had faded into something quieter. I told her I accepted her apology. She looked shocked, like she'd expected me to scream at her. I explained that I'd finally moved past the anger and found peace in how I rebuilt my confidence and career despite what they did to me. The barista called my name and I grabbed my coffee. Walking back to my office, I caught my reflection in a store window. My hair had grown to about 4 inches now, long enough to style but still short and easy. I looked different from I had a year ago, but I also looked stronger somehow. The salon incident had broken something in me, but what grew back was tougher than what was there before.